Hello, hello, everyone. What we're gonna, oh, let me, this is overtime. Thank you for joining us. We're gonna switch the frame here so that we can watch the stream. Also, with me today is Andering. We are expecting in about 15 minutes a quote major announcement from the New York Attorney General. Obviously, this has inspired a great deal of speculation. Normally, we would speculate, or at least I would speculate, as to what I think it is. I certainly have preferences as to what this major announcement will be. I do recall the last time we had Nate the lawyer with us, and it was a similar announcement made by a New York Attorney General. The thinking was that this was going to be related to Trump's taxes or to money laundering through Deutsche Bank, any number of other things that we've been looking at. And instead, it turned out that it was the not and the NRA was going to lose its nonprofit status and was essentially getting kicked out of New York, which is actually under normal circumstances very big news. It's the NRA is headquartered in New York. They were going to be able to get around it, but it was still a major blow to the NRA. Under normal circumstances, yeah, it would be big, but considering what we were expecting, everybody was like, okay. So I'm obviously, the thinking is this is going to be something related to Trump, but we just don't know. And the Attorney General's office in New York has pulled this before where they've said major announcement. And yeah, it would have been major under any other set of circumstances, but where everyone's expecting a Trump indictment, it wasn't. So we really don't know. I'm going to check out the live chat and catch up with what's going on there in a minute. We do have one other thing we'd like to mention before we start. Russia, Vladimir Putin has announced that he's going to be calling up 300,000 reservists. This is big for any number of reasons. Obviously, it affirms the fact that he is still committed to, quote, winning, whatever that means at this point, the war in Ukraine. We, at this point, suspect that what's going to happen is as follows. We believe that there's going to be a vote on the referendum to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk as parts of the Russian Federation. If this vote happens and if it passes, both of which we expect will happen at this point, that will make those areas, at least according to Russia, Russian. That will make, in Russia's view, the Ukrainian forces occupying and invading forces against Russia, believe it or not. That will be what they're going to argue because the territories that they're now in will suddenly be, quote, in Russian control. This will allow Putin to essentially use war powers, which he has not used thus far. The reason he hasn't used them is because he would need to declare war to use them, but he can't declare war without a vote from the Duma, which probably would fail, and he didn't want the humiliation of actually losing a vote to declare war. That's why he's been so coy about this. This isn't a war, but that's limited his powers of what he can do. He apparently at this point wants the chains off, and in order to do that, Russia would have to be invaded, or he'd have to get a declaration of war. Russia would be invaded ostensibly if he suddenly declares the land that the Ukrainians are standing on parts of Russia. At this point, we believe he is going to do that. He has said he is going to activate, again, 300,000 reservists. We believe this is part of that plan. We don't believe he's actually got the infrastructure to do it. We think he's going to do it anyway. He's also threatened the use of nuclear weapons in defense of his homeland, which is the scenario that he is now setting up. This is obviously extraordinarily serious, and we are going to be staying on it and probably have to go live at some point, either today or tomorrow, to cover it. We have Commander Starsky coming on Friday. He is a Ukrainian National Guardsman who's been streaming routinely about the war from his perspective, which is obviously really right in the middle of it. And we're going to discuss that with him on Friday. That's 1:30, I believe it's 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. We also have Commander McMillan on tomorrow. It's supposed to be a nice casual conversation, a downtime chat. I don't think we're going to do that. I think we're going to have to discuss what's going on because it's getting quite serious. But obviously the topic for today is the Attorney General's, quote, major announcement. Like I said, normally I'd speculate, but at this point, given what happened last time, I think we're going to keep the speculation down. I'll leave that to Xandring if he wants to speculate. Xandring, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. Cruising across South Dakota.
Nice.
I know what this announcement is.
Oh! Do tell.
I have a secret inside source. They called me this morning and said, "Hey, we hear you're going to go live. Let's give you a little heads up. Aliens are real and they have taken over the White House."
They'd be more animated than Biden, that would be for sure. All right. I don't think we're going to go with breaking news on that one. I appreciate it. Thank you. A credit to your sources.
Are you questioning my super secret anonymous sources? I thought that was taboo. I thought we weren't allowed to question anonymous sources anymore.
Yeah, this is in time. We don't question sources. It's all sources are. No, I think I'm not questioning this. You know what? I think it's too secret. I think it's too secret for this show. I think I just think that's too big. I think In Time is not ready to reveal that kind of news. That's my story. That's my story. I'm sticking with it.
It would definitely put In Time on the map.
Yes, it would.
We could join the ranks of InfoWars.
Yay! My cup runneth over. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to quickly check out the live chat. There's a lot going on. This is obviously
there is
the situation in Russia is
otherwise
huge.
Please.
Please.
Stuff that would otherwise be newsworthy, noteworthy, is really being overshadowed by a bunch of other stuff. Where you're like, really? I can't believe that's actually a thing that we're going to be broadcasting about. So all of these other issues that we would normally be talking about kind of get swept under the rug because, well, there's a hell of a lot more important things going on than the loss of a statewide 911 system or people who call this law the Purge Law looks like it's going to pass, and like, well, yeah, we don't really care about much of that stuff anymore.
So give us a minute on each, would you? Give us a minute on each of those. What happened in California? Yeah.
Early Monday morning, somebody or a fiber optic line was cut, and it brought down 911 service. Took them until like 10 a.m. in the morning to fix it. So if you called 911, you just got a busy signal, and probably not nefarious. I don't know how many people have broken up utility lines. Call 811 before you decide to dig. So that's probably what happened. Who knows? There's a whole wing of people. They're like, oh, it's a big conspiracy. They're trying it. They're testing it out. Anyway. And then there's a law in Illinois that, you can't be held in jail just because you're too poor to avoid bail. So now there's a bunch of people out there also calling this the Purge Law. They're going to be releasing all these, violent criminals into the population because they're not going to be able to hold them in jail anymore because they can't pay bail. I mean, I have to admit, the law enforcement agencies of Illinois are actually opposed to this law as well. But so yeah, there's just all drama going on across the country, and it's like, yeah, that's really not dramatic enough.
Yeah, we've
to make our radar.
Putin and Trump have raised the bar on what's newsworthy. It's
that's for sure, and not in a good way either.
No. Nope. So yeah, we've been following. So I know it's a wildly different topic, but it's obviously very important. We have heard that as of yesterday morning, NATO stopped a number of its exercises that it normally does basically every day. We have some of that information on the Discord. Come join us on the Discord. You can see how we collate all the news that we use for these shows, and you can participate in the discussions. We're obviously starting some pretty serious discussions on how we're going to discuss what's happening in Russia right now and the sources that we have for it, because we have a number of interesting sources. But that the reason they would stop those exercises would be because they're redeploying. So as of yesterday, we figured something was going to happen. We figured that NATO had a heads up on some piece of information, and then sure enough, Putin says he's calling up the reservists. He doesn't have, to the best of our knowledge, he does not have the ability in terms of supplies. He may have the AKs that he needs, but he doesn't have the uniforms, the helmets, probably doesn't have the ability to send the food to the right places. So he's... we had this discussion yesterday. He's a really smart guy, actually. Putin is extraordinarily intelligent, so why the hell is he doing some rather stupid things now? Because he's cornered, because he's losing, and because he does not want to lose power at any cost. And so he seems to be in somewhat denial of the reality that's facing him. We've talked about this. Russia can keep sending troops against Ukraine basically as long as they want to, because it's an authoritarian regime and he can keep conscripting people. But he's limited in his logistical ability to get people there, and it seems like if he's really willing to our concern is the chemical and nuclear weapons, and he seems to have intimated he's willing to use those in defense of Russia, and if he gets the vote on the Donetsk and Luhansk regions that he's trying to get, he'll be able to frame it that way. So it's nuanced. There's a lot to discuss. That's going to be a separate show. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, make sure you get all notifications to get those shows. It's gonna be a long week, I think. So and while we're at it, again, if you join us on the Discord, you can keep up with apologies. So, getting messages. That's
Keep
always
up with all the breaking. Keeping up with all the breaking news that's coming in and seeing where everything's going.
Yes, thank you.
That's what joining our Discord can do for you. We got lots of channels with lots of news and lots of people providing links to what's going on in the world.
And we have co-hosts bailing my ass out as soon as. Thank you. Absolutely. So, the Russian situation's really extremely serious. We think this is a prelude to a major move, probably to declare Ukraine. Putin is, I think at this point, the likelihood is significantly stronger than not that Putin is going to declare Ukraine an invading force. I mean, think about that for a second. That's what he's going to do. Dear Lord. All right, so...
the whole situation is so surreal, too.
Oh, stand by one.
It's like...
All right. We believe now this may have been pushed back. Sorry, why don't you finish your sentence? I want to see if I can confirm this. You were saying?
Yeah, the whole situation is pretty surreal. I was too young to really grasp the significance of the collapse of the Soviet Union. I remember I was in, I believe it was 7th grade. It was on our social studies teacher's television as it was happening live, and he's like, this is a major event, and it's like, we never expected this to really happen, and was going on and on about the importance of it. And of course, I was more concerned about the next book in the series I was reading. Looking back, I can see how it was, could have been quite a bit of news. You've lived this long with the Cold War, and suddenly the Cold War is just more or less over. So, there's certainly been quite a few very surreal moments throughout history. It's just this wasn't something that I would have expected to see. That we're seriously contemplating whether a nuclear-armed nation is going to use said nuclear weapons in war, and think that it's an actual possibility, or at least is actually scaled on a probability scale instead of just, oh well, they have them and they could use them, but the mutually assured destruction mostly stops anybody from ever using them. Now we're actually going, let's judge the probability that he might actually use these things. So I wasn't expecting there to be a kind of a conflict of this scale. I guess I should have been, because history has shown us, the probabilities of major armed conflicts over the course of time, and they have followed shockingly similar patterns. But you still get sucked in by normalcy bias, where it's like, the world's just going to be working the same way it did yesterday, and it'll be working next week the same way it did last week. And yet, if anything over the last decade has shown us, or more than a decade now, that that just really isn't true, and yet we still get sucked into normalcy bias. Wow, this is really shocking. It's like, really? After the last 20 years, you think this is really shocking? Look at all of the shocks that have gone through the system in the last 20 years. And this surprises you? Yep, we all surprised.
Let me cut you off. I think we should have this discussion. So let me tell you guys what we're going to do right now and what's happening. So the Attorney General's office, the New York Attorney General's office, was slated to make a, quote, major announcement at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. That passed, obviously, 2 minutes ago. We've become aware now that they have delayed it an hour. We don't know why. What I think we're going to do at this point is actually just stay on for that hour. There's a lot to discuss anyway. So I think we're going to discuss what we're expecting to hear there, or it's all going to be speculation, and we're going to discuss what's going on in Russia, because that is... that in and of itself, given the context that we have, is probably breaking news. We've also just learned something. This was Dorito, I think, passed this one up. We have it in Russian, and my Russian is rusty, so it's going to take me a minute to translate it. But it looks like, okay, so here's what's going to happen, what we're seeing in Russia. They are going to do a referendum, and it looks like they're going to take more than Donetsk and Luhansk. So the regions that they are now... going to try to declare as part of Russia. So again, what we think is going to happen at this point is they're going to declare a number of regions as part of Russia, since these regions are Ukrainian, and the Ukrainian army is there recapturing these areas that Russia took. If they're declared Russia, then what Putin is going to say is, oh, the Ukrainian army is there and they're fighting, therefore we are being invaded. When he says that, he then has essentially all the powers and more in the declaration of war. We believe he's going to institute martial law. He's going to clamp down even more on the people who are protesting, and things are going to get probably very bad in Russia. How bad they get for the Ukrainians is dependent on how well he can deploy them. We don't think it's going to be very well, but he has threatened to use nuclear weapons. So we are going to get into that. The regions that it looks like now it's 4 regions. Donetsk, so that's Donetsk, Luganskia, Zaporizhzhia, and Zeroskania. So that's Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. Okay, Zaporizhzhia. So that's 4 regions that we believe he's going to declare parts of Russia, and then the standing army, the army that is, when I say standing, they're literally standing in those areas because they're defending their homes, suddenly are now invaders. He's going to declare that Russia has been invaded. This is going to grant him the war powers that he's been seeking but can't get because the Duma wouldn't have voted to give him those war powers. That means he can do a lot more in prosecuting the war in Ukraine and more against the protesters at home. We believe he is obviously planning on doing that. And he has said that he would use nuclear weapons, and reminded everyone that he's not bluffing, that he would use nuclear weapons in the defense of his home, defense of Russian homeland, which at that point would include those breakaway regions. So we're going to, I think, discuss that and a couple of other things. We do apologize. I think at this point, again, best to just stay on the air. As we understand it, the Attorney General is going to be coming on with a, quote, major announcement. She had, or the Office of the Attorney General yesterday was handing out press passes. They limited the press to exclusively those who have passes, so they're expecting a big announcement, and they want to keep it from turning into a madhouse. So they've dramatically restricted who's going to be able to be there in the room as they make the announcement. It's not open. It's not that we, as we understand it, it's not set to be open to the public per se. I mean, the public can see it, the press can show it to the public, but they won't be allowing any members of the public there. That means they're expecting something big. It could be anything from another NRA thing to something related to Trump. We do know the Attorney General's office has been investigating Trump on a number of things, so we will find out what that is, and we will bring it as soon as we know. I do have a couple of messages coming in, so let me go deal with that. Well, is Andring, I cut you off, but you were talking about, and Dorito dropped the English translation, so thank you. Yeah, Donetsk, Luhansk, okay, perfect. So, yeah.
Well, I would give you shit about your pronunciations of areas, except that I could not do anything anywhere close to better, so...
Yeah, it's well, and you know, you're living in the U.S. It's hard to get an opportunity to use these languages when you're in the U.S., so they get rusty. And my ability to read Russian has degraded some, and I'm dyslexic, so it's always. Although I don't know why I found reading foreign languages somewhat easier. Maybe that. Not foreign languages, foreign alphabets. So if I'm reading in Spanish or French, I still have the same problems. But reading in Russian, it's a bit easier. I don't know why.
Well, I never had the language skills to really get rusty, unless you want me to count to 10, and then I can do it in several languages. But that's about the extent of my foreign language prowess.
So in Chicago, about 10 years ago, I forget the name of the hospital, but one of the biggest hospitals in Chicago dropped ads in the local paper for Klingon translators. They needed a Klingon translator. Yes, a Klingon translator. Klingon is a language. It's an artificial language. Somebody made it. A big fan of the Star Trek show made the Klingon language. So it exists, you can learn it, and they needed a translator. Why? Turns out there had been a Star Trek convention in Chicago. There was a guy had a head injury, and it was bad. He ended up in the hospital, and he lost all of his natural language. He did not lose any languages that he learned after the age of 10. There was only one language he learned after the age of 10. It was Klingon. So, the only way the doctors could communicate with the patient was to get a Klingon translator. This ended up causing a whole bunch of, and there was a huge, like, administrative hubbub over this, because they didn't want to pay for a Klingon translator. And when the administration found out, they're like, why are we advertising and looking for Klingon translators? And it turned out there was some argument for why they actually needed a permanent, like, staffer that could speak Klingon. It's just like, I can understand why the administration would be upset, but at that point they actually did need a Klingon translator. I don't know how you translate, like, I mean, does Klingon actually have a word for, like, what is it, a concussion and, like, memory, I forget what the kind of memory loss is, but some of it's pretty technical jargon. I was like, I don't know if that exists in Klingon, but okay.
It probably does at this point. I mean,
yeah.
When it first got out, it was pretty basic language. I'm sure at this point there's been enough conventions and enough geeks to expand the Klingon language that it probably does have quite a lot of technical things in it now.
All right,
Still not going to learn it.
Yeah, well, I'd rather learn, like, Farsi, or a language that's actually, like, used by real people.
You think that Star Trek fans aren't real people? You heard it here first. If you know Klingon, you're not a real person.
Son of a, oh dear Lord. It's
Sounds
spoken by
discriminatory of you.
Klingons, which, as it turns out, are fictitious. You need a news agency to tell you that. Is that what?
No. That can't be true anymore, because I've been told that you can self-identify as just about anything. I am sure that there are people out there that are identifying as Klingons. And how do you know they're not?
Is that where we're going to go today? Is that really where we're going to go today? We just don't have enough on our plate that we're going to get into. Okay.
There are some definite things that I can look around and say, yeah, I can see that your self identity really does match that. And then there's that very small fringe of just bat snot crazy people that have decided they're going to identify as a cat. And I'm like,
yes, that has
okay,
happened.
that's a bridge too far. So if somebody can identify as a puppykin, then as an actual identity instead of just simply a fetish, and there's nothing wrong with most fetishes. I mean, you're really interested in puppy play, that's great. That doesn't mean you're a dog, though. I mean, I'm pretty sure we can definitively say that. So I am absolutely sure that there are people out there that have identified as Klingon. So I'm not sure how we make the distinction between what can and cannot be identified as.
Okay, I think. Okay, I do think that's fair. What on earth? Okay,
which is awfully far afield from war in Eastern Europe and the potential massive announcement from the Attorney General's office of New York.
Yep.
They punked us once.
They did.
They better deliver this time.
They did. So I wasn't going to speculate. Now we've got 40 minutes, so I'm going to.
Now we don't have much of a choice.
Yeah, I have a guess. So my hope and my suspicion is it's Trump. I think the people who are sitting there watching now, I think it's on everybody's mind and everybody's thinking about it. The Attorney General's office knew why people would be watching. They knew why people are going to tune in for this. It's the assumption that Trump is going to be indicted. Now, I had assumed indictments are coming. I have no doubt indictments are coming. I think they're going to come from the Justice Department, and I think it's going to be at the federal level that we're going to be seeing indictments. So it caught me a little off guard, the idea that he's going to get a state indictment first. He is going to get state indictments. Well, no, I don't know that he's going to get state indictments. He's indictable. We had two attorneys quit about 6 months ago. They quit the office of the Southern District because, in their view, there was easily enough to indict Trump, and the Southern District had ostensibly they hadn't refused and given it a hard no, but in the opinion of these two attorneys, the Southern District was simply just not going to prosecute. They had no interest in prosecuting. They were interested in making it look like they did their investigation, but they weren't going to prosecute, and they had plenty to do it, which is why they quit. So it's a shitstorm for any state that decides to sue. I think everybody's waiting for an indictment because whoever indicts, the first person through the wall, it gets the bloodiest. Whoever indicts Trump first is going to bear the brunt of a great deal of difficulties. I think indictments are going to start rolling in after that, blood in the water and all that. So I think everyone's been waiting for the federal government to do it. Let the federal government take the charge on any kind of indictment. He's absolutely indictable over the Mar-a-Lago stuff. He's probably indictable on a whole bunch. He's indictable on Deutsche Bank. He's indictable on the real estate issues, the false evaluations, all that other. He's indictable on so much. So
this is a really difficult situation too, because you can look at all of the information that's been put out there and you can easily see where, there's a lot of impropriety here and there's probably a lot of evidence to justify indictments. But the first person that actually does indict a former sitting president breaks a long-standing tradition of not going after previous administrations. And that's a very dangerous precedent to set up, because you don't want the next administration to spend all of its time going after previous administrations. But there comes a time when the violations are so egregious that you don't have much of a choice, because if you just turn a blind eye, you just tell everybody that we're not actually going to prosecute you for any malfeasance you perform while in office. And that's what kind of got us to a Trump to begin with. Small steps along the way have now led to a president that actually decided to use the federal power, federal authority, federal law enforcement to abduct citizens off of the street and disappear them. Now, thankfully, it wasn't permanently disappearing them, but I think that had there been no major pushback, or if it not really covered very much, or there had actually been a lot more support for that, I think that we would have seen that happen a lot more often, and it would have taken more steps. And that's the exact path that you go down to finish A, and you don't want that to happen. So it makes it a really, really difficult, because I don't like the precedent of in this case it's a state going after them, but like the federal government going after a previous administration, that's a really dangerous thing to start getting involved in. And yet it's also incredibly dangerous to let people get away with the kinds of shenanigans, I use that word very lightly, that Trump got into. It's like, that's not okay either. And if we want to be able to have confidence that our governments are not getting involved in tyrannical activities, then we have to push back immediately and hard when they try it. And that hasn't really been happening too awfully much. So we've kind of painted ourselves into this corner of which is the worst to allow to happen. And I have a feeling that we're going to have to brave that line of, we're going to start indicting people, we're going to start charging people, previous administrations, previous politicians, for these things, even sitting politicians. I think we need to go so far as that. And we have to brave that line and hope that it works out for us. And if we can keep diligent enough to make sure that, this authority, or this perceived authority, perceived mandate from the people to go after previous administrations isn't abused, and that we keep them honest. And when it becomes clear that somebody is abusing this, that we push back and stop them and say, no, this isn't okay, this is dangerous. It's not an easy situation to deal with.
No, I think that's true, and I think actually it might be worse. So there's a couple of things to unpack. First of all, whether or not Nixon should have been pardoned. I think you bring up an excellent point. I mean, imagine if we had already set up the precedent of indicting previous presidents, and we had Macmillan on talking about that when the Romans had their was it the prefects that they would send into other districts. They'd send administrators, and when the administrators came home, the administrators always immediately faced charges, and the opposing party would indict the administrators immediately upon their return. It didn't matter if they did a good job or not. It was just par for the course. And so every administrator, part of your job was to earn money and get money out of those districts for your own defense upon your return, because it was just par for the course that as soon as you got back, you were going to get indicted. Imagine if Trump was walking into a presidency where the precedent was that you'd go after everything that you possibly could from the previous president. Imagine what he would have done going after the previous Obama administration. So thank God that precedent didn't exist. But you also can't, we're sitting here with Biden saying, he really obviously crossed a lot of lines. So before I continue with getting into that. Now, good night, Mark. Mark is going to be heading out. Thank you for coming by. So somebody had asked, and this is a fair question, what do we think this is about? I think the chances are probably, I wouldn't even go 60-40, I'd go 55. So just slightly greater than not that this is an indictment of Trump. I think that's what we're looking at. But I mean, I would literally ballpark that 55-45 in favor of this as an indictment of Trump. The reason I have it at that low is because the last time that the Attorney General's office in New York said, hey, we've got a major announcement, it was the decertification of the NRA as a nonprofit, which under any other set of circumstances would have actually been national news. The NRA is a huge organization. It's a very powerful organization. It's the single most powerful gun lobby, obviously, has tremendous influence in Congress, and they're based out of New York. So while they could move, and in fact did move, and it wouldn't take down the organization, that was absolutely breaking news that merited the kind of attention that it got. It absolutely did, except for the fact that everybody was expecting an indictment of the former president of the United States. So, everybody was all just like, wait, that's all it is? It's the NRA? So it's possible they got some blowback from that. I have a hard time believing they would do it again. They know what everybody is thinking. They know what everybody's expecting. That's also a very large platform. So if there's an issue they want to give attention to, this is a great way to do it. What's his name? DeSantis did the same thing. We said, I'm going to make an announcement that's going to make all the liberals, shake. And of course, everyone's like, oh my God, he's announcing a run for president. No. So because they've done it once, I'm lower in my confidence that this is about Trump, but I still think the likelihood is greater than not. I don't think they want to go through that again of raising expectations. So I suspect it's a Trump indictment. Hopefully we'll find out in about 30 minutes when they go live. But so you were talking, Azandering, about... and once again, we have a tremendous amount to cover on the Russia front. That's I'm genuinely reaching a state of concern about that. We'll discuss how and why, but that's going to be a different show. But we'll, like, subscribe. A great way to support this channel. Like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and come check us out on the Discord and see how and why we're concerned about Russia and how we're going to be covering that in the future. And we've got a couple of shows, including Operator Starsky, who is an Ukrainian National Guardsman on the front lines. We will be having him on Friday to talk about what's going on. But we're also going to be keeping up with Commander McMillan. I'm talking with him basically every day as we're sitting there trying to troubleshoot what we think is going to happen in Russia, and it's not good. Putin is, we believe, in the process of making a extremely destabilizing move. He has called up the reserves. That hasn't been done since World War II in Russia. And we have some other very concerning signs, but we'll save that for either a little later in this show, because we do have about a half hour left, and or we're going to have to do a different show on that. But check us out on the Discord to learn more. Anyway, so you were talking about that precedent. Do you think Nixon should have been indicted?
Yes.
So wrong to pardon him on what ground?
I think I understand the sentiment behind the Carter administration deciding to pardon him, and I think that it was ultimately the wrong move. Of course, we have the hindsight or the benefit of hindsight, so we can see the kinds of things that happened since then. And had Nixon not been pardoned and actually been held accountable for those things that he did, his administration did, I don't think we end up really with a Trump. Well, I mean, we could have still ended up with Trump, but I don't think he would have tried to do nearly half the stuff that he did try to do, because there would have been that precedent there. It's like, look, if you start engaging in malfeasance and I hate to say conduct unbecoming, because it makes me sound too military, but.
Well, that's a broad term, unfortunately.
We know that it's like we know that it's like you're not going to be able to get away with this, But you can look back and see, okay, well, what major politician, has really suffered for the actions that they took while in office? I mean, truly, like, been brought up on charges, and even when it was clear that they violated the law, and still weren't brought up on charges. It's like we have a history of this happening, and it started off with kind of small things. They didn't charge Clinton with perjury and convict him of perjury, even though he clearly did. It started with small things, and now we're to the point where it seems that the Trump administration literally sat down and tried to plan out a takeover of the U.S. government to remain in office illegally. It's like, how do you get to that point except by not actually holding people accountable for their actions and charging them where they have the evidence to charge them? But again, it's a dangerous precedent to set.
Yeah, it is. And
incoming. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, and that's why I was a little concerned about the conduct unbecoming. I mean, it has to be. So the whole reason that a president isn't indictable is because if you, and I mean a sitting president, is because if the sitting president is indictable, then anybody who's got any grievance against him is going to indict him for any number of reasons. A, just for the attention. I mean, it's like, oh, I'm in a court case against the president of the United States. B, to slow down whatever is political. You know, if you have a Democrat in office, every single Republican and anybody could indict him, right? Anybody who's ever met him could say, oh, well, you know, he stole my cookies when I was in kindergarten, and I'm going to indict him now. Obviously, statute of limitations, yada, yada, yada. But they could try. And so there is a shield against that kind of abuse against anybody who's got office in either Congress or in the president or what is it, the judicial branch, and that's why impeachment has to be made available. But the point of impeachment is to bring down that shield and make them vulnerable to whatever sanctions. Impeachment, if you're impeached, it doesn't even necessarily mean you're removed from office. That's one possible consequence. But the whole point the reason that has to be made available is you can't remove them from office by any other kind of, you can't indict them while they're sitting president. Now, based on that same kind of reasoning, the idea is once they're gone, they have at least some immunity, essentially qualified immunity, as long as what they were doing was a reasonable person could think was in the best interest of this country. They should probably be immune from prosecution. We're still sort of trying to figure out legally what kind of immunity they should or would have. It's not actually outlined at all in the Constitution. This is a concept that has been there only because we've recognized it would be very hard to function as a country if we didn't have that concept. If everybody, as soon as they step down from being president, were subject to the whims of absolutely every citizen, they're a huge target, and nobody would want to become president. We wouldn't get good presidents anymore because anyone who would be good at the job would be smart enough to realize I don't want it. So we all recognize there has to be some form of immunity, but it's the details that we've never actually had to sort out until now. I think you're right. It's funny because I hadn't. I've always thought that Nixon should have been prosecuted. I think I've usually just sort of towed the line with, oh, well, I know why he was pardoned, and it kind of makes sense. But no, I think you're right, and especially in light of what we're talking about today and what's going on now, there hasn't been accountability, and I think you're right. There needed to be. The more you show, you said this a lot, and this is something that I've only since you and I have talked about it have I started to really give the credence that I think it deserves, which is that you're setting a precedent for future generations, future administrations, if you allow this, and you can't set the precedent that this is okay, because once you set that is literally the path that we in a democracy are trying to avoid, is that the president can get away with murder, and you are setting that precedent. That's the end of that line if it continues. Yeah.
Especially over the last 100 years, little 120 years or so, we've seen the progression of this where, the government will do something that it wasn't previously thought to be able to do, or at least it was generally held that they didn't have the power to do this. They decide they're going to do it. They kind of, earlier in the century, they had to put up more of a fight, more convincing to do it. But once they kind of got it in, I mean, that's where that little cliche, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program, or the closest thing to immortality you'll ever get is a government program. There's obviously some notable exceptions to that. So it's not true in all cases. But over the last 120 years, we have seen where the government has taken more power upon itself, more authority upon itself, and there wasn't enough of a pushback to stop them. So they kept going. And that's how you end up with a massive federal apparatus that we have today versus, 120 years ago, the size of the federal government was minuscule compared to the size that it is today. And not always is it a great thing. When the income tax was first proposed, it was only supposed to be a tax on the wealthy. It wasn't supposed to affect middle-class people. That's how they got it passed. It was a tax of the rich. Well, over the years, it has slowly trickled down. There we go with trickle down economics again.
I knew you'd bring that. I knew you'd bring up trickle down. Although I'll admit I didn't expect it in this context. But okay.
Well, I mean, it works for really bad things as well as really good things, and that's why overall you can't say that it's a great, awesome thing to have, because it can bring really bad things too. So, over the course of the last 120 years, we have seen this kind of progression. If there's no pushback, then that by default, I guess, or de facto means that you're okay with it. So we should keep doing it. So if there aren't consequences to doing bad things, more bad things will happen.
Yep, and so I see Jason in the live chat. It was an excellent show last night. I was going to DM you and thank you. We had Jason on last night. It was a very informative discussion on climate change. So thank you for that, Jason. And he asked the question, and I think
be sure to share that out to all your friends. Share that episode to all your friends. They need to see it.
That was a good show. We should. Yeah, I'm going to make sure that also goes out on the Twitter. So, so to reiterate, we had the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, said that there was going to be a major announcement today. The way it dropped, they said that they were going to be issuing press passes in advance, and only people with press passes could be allowed. So it was going to be a closed event. Obviously, it would be open would be able to see it, but it was they were trying to restrict how many people were going to be there. So that is very suggestive of some very big news. Obviously, that office knows what people are going to think. They're going to think it's an indictment of Trump. So it was a very big deal. We decided we would obviously carry that live. That was supposed to happen about a half hour ago. They delayed it by an hour. We are anticipating it now, and you can see, if you've got the high-resolution version of this, you can see the clock down at the bottom. It's in approximately 26 minutes is when we're expecting to see it. If they delay it again, we may go down and wait, but we actually have a lot of other very big things we needed to discuss. The situation in Russia and Ukraine is coming to a head. Ukraine has obviously made some significant advances. Putin has been limited in the amount that he can draft and for how long he can keep his troops deployed, because they haven't declared war. They haven't declared war because he needs the Duma, which is basically the kind of their parliament or their Congress, he needs a vote in the Duma to declare war, and his thinking was that vote would probably fail. It would be a humiliating defeat. That's why he calls this what is it? A military? What's he been calling it now? My brain's still in neutral. A military operation. Yeah, he's been calling it a military operation. So he's calling it a military operation because he can't declare war. But because it's a military operation, he can't keep people fighting past whatever their contract dates are. He's very limited in what, not very limited, he's reasonably limited in what he can do. So we believe he has found a way to declare war and to fully mobilize his military powers and his domestic powers. And what we believe at this point he's going to do is as follows. First of all, he earlier mobilized 300,000 reservists. That's very concerning because that is a major escalation in Ukraine. We don't believe he has the infrastructure to get anything more than 10% of that actually mobilized and fighting, at least in a meaningful way. He may get even half of them to the front lines, but they're not going to have food, they're not going to have fuel, they'll have guns, but probably very little ammunition. So, but he's doing it, and that's a huge move. That's very concerning. There's some indication that NATO is redeploying. They actually started yesterday morning is what it looks like. So we believe NATO was aware that he was going to do something He's been telegraphing this. What he's been saying is now 4 regions in Russia that they're going to hold a vote to recognize those regions as part of the Russian Federation. If they do that, what we believe he's going to do is immediately declare an invasion by Ukraine. I say again, he is going to declare that Ukraine has invaded Russia. That's the argument we believe he's going to make. He's going to make it because if he declares regions like Luhansk as part of Russia, the Ukrainian army is there right now. They're kicking the Russians out because that area is Ukraine. If he declares it, and if he personally, and quote, Russia, recognizes it as Russia, the argument is going to be, wait a minute, the Ukrainian army is in Russia and they're fighting Russians. That's an invasion. So he argues that it's an invasion. Now that Russia's been invaded, he doesn't need a vote from the Duma in order to declare a war. It's a war. They've been invaded. He has full wartime powers. We believe at that point he is going to deploy a number of the troops locally. He is going to clamp down on the protests. We have discussed this before, but we believe there has been firebombings of army recruiting stations, graffiti. We talked about Swan Lake and references to the deposition. Can I even to be deposed? Yeah, maybe, of Putin, and why we think that there's been significant attempts to remove him already. So we believe that he is going to try to repel that by deploying the military locally. He has also said that he would be willing to use, he has reiterated just today that he'd be willing to use nuclear weapons in defense of his country. What we believe that means is if he declares the eastern third of Ukraine, if he essentially declares the eastern third of Ukraine as Russia, then any troops that are there defending their homeland are now invaders in the Ukrainian narrative, and he is essentially saying he would use weapons of mass destruction to kick out those invaders. He then basically carves off a third of Ukraine, says it's now Russia, and anyone who wishes to deny me that better come at me with nuclear weapons. We believe that's what he's going to do, and he's on his way towards that. We're going to have that discussion with Commander McMillan and probably with Operator Starsky starting tomorrow night if things don't heat up and go sooner. So there's a lot to cover, but we are still waiting. We've got about 20 minutes left before we're expecting an announcement from the New York Attorney General. We're going to be honest here. Everybody is expecting that the announcement is going to be that Trump has been indicted on something. I ballparked it earlier at 45-4. I think the likelihood is greater than not that that's what it is, but I'm hesitant to say it's anything more than just a probability in the direction of indicting Trump, and I already discussed the reasons why. And they know that that's why everybody wants to see this. They know that's what everybody's expecting. Are they going to play with people's expectations? They've already done that once before with the NRA. So I don't know, but I suspect, yes, it's Trump. That's what I'm thinking. So did I cover everything? Is Andrew? Am I good here? That's a lot.
Yeah, because there's not enough already to cover. It's throwing a whole bunch of other stuff too, make it even more complicated. Yeah, I'm still of the kind of opinion: fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. So I'm still going with the aliens hypothesis.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, because
is it Klingons or just random aliens? Is it Klingons or just random aliens? Okay.
No, it's the random aliens. It's the little green men with big heads and eyes. That's who it's going to be. I mean, that's the only kind of news I can think of that the New York Attorney General's office would be talking about that would top Trump. So,
all right,
I got to go with the aliens.
So we've also Biden had. So it says that Biden's at the UN. He's already back. He was at the funeral, the Queen's funeral. So Biden is apparently telling the UN. It looks to me like they're saying he's there in person. I wouldn't have thought he'd be back by now, but Biden is going to be telling the UN, or is telling the UN, that Russia's war is, quote, an affront to the body's charter. So this is something we've also been looking at, which is the possibility that Russia is going to be booted from the UN. We believe there are two things that are staying Russia's hand so far. Believe it or not, this is their hand being stayed. They have not used chemical or biological weapons in Ukraine. There was evidence that they were considering doing it. There was considerable evidence, including anecdotes that they were passing out to their troops. But you never know with them. Putin is a spy master. Let's assume that he never intended in any way whatsoever. It's a bad assumption, but just for the sake of argument, let's assume he had no interest in using chemical weapons in Ukraine. Yeah, still hand out antidotes to your troops, because what happens is when your troops are shot and killed and then the antidotes are found on their bodies, people are going to say, uh-oh, chemical weapons are about to be used, and it slows your enemy down. It gives them considerable pause. So that kind of misinformation is a tactic in and of itself. Having said that, I do think he was intending to use them. We believe NATO informed Russia, listen, if you use weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine, would consider that a red line and we would get involved. So we think that was done unofficially, under the table. We think that's one of the things that stayed his hand. The other thing that stayed his hand was there was some talk, and we all remember this, and we covered this when the Russian diplomats would talk, everybody at the UN just got up and walked out. Like, no, we're not listening to Russia. Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They do not want to lose that. There is one way, and only one way, that they could lose their status as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and if they get expelled from the UN. So, we think there has been movement to expel them from the UN, but they haven't made that public yet, and that they've been kind of waiting for Putin to make a move that would justify expelling them from the UN. If they get expelled from the UN, then even if they come back, they're still not members of the Security Council. That would dramatically change how the UN operates, because right now, any permanent member, which includes Russia, includes the US, can veto any act of these, or any, not an act, it's a, what is it?
Resolution.
Thank you. Resolution from the UN, appreciate that. Can veto any UN Security Council resolution. Now, with Russia not able to do it, one of the reasons the UN was able to condemn it, but they weren't able to make a resolution condemning it, because any resolution out of the Security Council, Russia vetoes. They would lose that veto power, and it would dramatically empower the UN in a way it's never been before. I'll say it before and I'll say it again. I don't think the U.S. should have veto power either. I'm not in a rush to have it removed, but the reality is we make bad decisions as well. I think the kind of veto power and the way it's been exercised has made the UN a toothless, almost worthless organization at a minimum if Russia gets expelled, and I think everybody's kind of would like to see Russia expelled. At any rate, that's what I think. So when the language Biden used was, quote, an affront to the body's charter. That suggests to me that they are prepping a move to try to get Russia expelled.
It would not surprise me if that's in the works, that they're trying to figure a way to get that done, because you run into the problem of how do you stop a bully if the bully is willing to burn down the world if you try and stop him? What can't he justify? What can't he do? At what point does he cross the line where you're like, we're going to risk the fate of the entire world to stop him? It's like, is he really willing to do that? If he were to use weapons of mass destruction, the UN NATO has already said that they would get involved at that point. And there is no way, we have seen very ample evidence that there is absolutely no way that the Russian military would stand even a fraction of a chance of defeating NATO forces. NATO would wipe the face of the earth wipe the face of the earth of the Russian army. They would just simply cease to exist, and would do so quickly. The only recourse he would have at that point is nuclear weapons. So if he's actually willing to use them, how do you? I mean, you run into a catch-22. It's like you can't stop anything that he does because he just threatens to nuke everything, and so you just have to do what? Let him keep bullying everybody around? It's like at some point you have to take the calculated risk and say, no, this is unacceptable, and we're going to stop you. And the question comes is, when is this? So yeah, I think that they are looking for probably any possible way to exert pressure against him to stop, or at least to stop him from using weapons of mass destruction. I don't see how he wins in any scenario. I don't see how he gets out of this in any form of good shape. I don't understand. Maybe he's desperate and not seeing clearly. Maybe he
I
thought
think
this was
that's
going to work out great, and now he's in a corner and he doesn't see a way out of it, and except to just keep going. I mean, how many times have we seen, looking back in history, we've seen something doomed to fail, and yet people just keep charging forward because they don't have any better idea. It's like they know it's going to fail too, but they just keep going because they know that any of the alternatives, anything else, will mean certain failure, and there's that Hail Mary chance that something might pull through or something might change in the future that'll allow them to pull out the victory or at least avoid a loss. So
well,
I mean, that's the only thing I can see.
Yeah, it's wish thinking. He it's like, what has he got to lose if he's going to be if he's going to be deposed anyway, if he's going to be kicked out of office, if he's or killed. What's he got to lose by risking everything at this point? So it's, I think it's about trying to find an off ramp for him, but there's been a couple of off ramps that have been offered, and he's declined them. He wants an off ramp, I think, that allows him to completely stay in power and rule Russia the way he wants. And I don't think that there's any scenario on which that's on the table for anybody at this point. So,
I mean, one of the things I see is if he were to do all of these, the speculation were to bear fruit, and that is his plan. The moment he actually uses weapons of mass destruction, I have a feeling that pretty much all of the world's intelligence agencies are now going to be gunning for his life. It's like the United States has assassinated world leaders before in the past, and I don't think that we would hesitate to do it again. So, I mean, if he does use nuclear or use any kind of weapons of mass destruction, it could just be chemical, biological warfare as well. I think that he's going to be put an end to. And it's not just our government that is going to be looking to do it. I mean, all of European governments will probably be looking to, that'd be the fastest way to end the entire problem. Because it seems that he's the driving force behind all of this. And that if somebody were to take him out, I think that this would end quickly. So I have a hard time not believing that would happen if that is his plan and he follows through with all of that. I don't see how he gets out alive.
No, I think that's true. I don't think he's afraid of death is one thing, but that's a whole nother. That also lose, and this is for him a much more minor thing, but it's important that if he uses any kinds of WMDs, he loses India and he loses China as an ally, and they're both distancing themselves now, which they hadn't been doing. So, dropping thermite on civilians. I'd like to check on that. We do have the footage. In fact, actually, can I get that footage? I think I can. Let me get the footage. We have footage of a very spectacular footage of these white lights falling on an area in Donetsk. I believe it's really spectacular. It appears to be drone footage. That footage at this point we believe is legit. We've seen footage like that before. We've never seen anything quite that close and spectacular. But it's what is it? It's the incendiary rounds, which we believe our understanding is, depending on how they're used, they're legit in war. They're extremely serious, and he shouldn't be using them, but they are just one step shy of, for example, a white phosphorus, which it was in Irpin that they were first used, and they were mistaken for white phosphorus, and there were claims of white phosphorus attack on Irpin. And we looked into it, and that was another one where Dorito was a huge advantage, because Dorito took one look at that and said, no, it's not. And we were able to identify the rounds that were being used, and we believe that's what's happening now. Let me see if I can bring that up, because that's worth seeing. We do believe that we're going to have in about 5 minutes the New York Attorney. Is it 5 or 10? 10 minutes. New York Attorney General, and I'm getting some messages. I'll get to those in a second. So, oh yeah, he has committed war crimes. I know what one of those messages is going to be, because he has committed multiple war crimes, and he's committed war crimes with the Thermite. I see. Yeah. Okay. I will get to that. Let me try to. Yeah, he's committed a lot of war crimes already, and there's the mass graves. We've got all that also in our. So if you join us on the Discord, we have a section on Ukraine. We have a separate section on Ukraine. You have to opt into it. It's an explicit section, and we have explicit footage of what's been going on in Ukraine, and some of it is extraordinarily shocking. I'm not even going to describe it right now, because that's not what people who are here for are here for. They're here for the New York Attorney General, but some of it is like medieval times shit, and it's clear they're doing it. We've got the footage. It's on our Discord. Again, you have to opt in. Come join us on the Discord. See how we put these shows together. See what our sources are. We've got a lot of very good sources, and yeah, so there's a lot there. What I'd like to do now is find the deployment of, because that was a pretty spectacular thing, and since I wasn't going to actually use it in this particular show, we did not have that queued up, so I do know where I can get it. In fact, there it is. I've got, oh, you know what I can do? That's right. I can probably, let's get the highest quality we can of that, and then get that in here. I can put that in. This is Ozern Village in Donetsk. It's shocking, and all of this stuff is I don't remember if this is thermite or what this is, but it's incendiary rounds, so it will cause anything it hits to burn. If it will burn clear through a person, and will set houses on fire and do all that other stuff. This is not a graphic image that you're going to see, but it's nonetheless quite shocking. Let me bring that up. What's the easiest way to do that? Oh, standby one. Okay, that just let's yeah, that reset. So there we go. I think we can get that in there. And let's take a look at this, and then it's reasonably short. And here we go. This is the footage. And again, that's Ozern Village, Donetsk region in Ukraine. I said that's short. We'll do that one more time. Oh, thank you. I bet you, so Titan got that to me. I was so busy trying to find it. Titan already had it. Thank you, Titan. All right. So we are now less than 5 minutes away. Did you see, were you able to see that, Xandering? Or I know you're driving, so.
Yeah, I was able to get a gander at it. It's kind of hard. It's on my phone. My phone's on my dash mount, so it was pretty small, but it almost looks like an exploded parachute flare, but I'm sure when I go back and look at it, it'll be able to see it a little bit more clearly.
So my
It looks
understanding
like
is
it was
white.
over a hell of a lot broader area than any kind of flare would have exploded into. So that was like an entire town, right? That was
Yeah,
dropping on.
that was an entire town. So Titan is saying the consensus is it's thermite, but it's incendiary rounds, so it's not white phosphorus. I think that's an important distinction. At this point, if it's thermite, it's almost certainly still a war crime anyway. And depending on how you deploy incendiary rounds can be deployed, but it's how you deploy them. And actually, white phosphorus can even be deployed under some circumstances, depending on how, because my understanding is it can actually be used in tracer rounds and so on and so forth, but it can't be used actually against people or populations directly. So that's my understanding. It's been a while since I've looked at that. We've got a lot going
Yeah,
on.
thermite is a chemical reaction. It's a chemical fire. It creates its own oxygen. You can't put it out with like CO2 or water. It goes out. It's like burning magnesium. The
Really?
stuff doesn't go out, and it's aluminum powder and iron oxide powder. And when you light it on fire, the chemical reaction creates a chemical fire, and it will literally melt through anything because it burns at like 3,000 degrees. So it's literally molten metal that falls. Yeah, the stuff you can make it in your backyard. Uh, it's not hard. You just have to get the right kind of materials and the right proportions together, and then put a fuse in it, and you can make it yourself. And it burns through just about anything. It's the kind of things that they'll use to disable tanks. They have thermite grenades that you put on there, and it ignites the grenade, and then it literally just melts right through the tank. It's not explosive. It's just it's like pouring lava on things. So,
Damn. All right.
thermite is every bit. If you were to weaponize thermite, say you got a big thermite grenade and then put a charge in it to disperse it out, it would do every bit the same kind of damage that using white phosphorus would. Because white phosphorus is also a chemical fire that doesn't go out. You can't put it out. Same thing with thermite. It's a chemical fire that you can't put out. It'll burn in water. It'll burn in an oxygen-free environment. It just keeps burning.
So
I
you could
suppose
literally burn it in space.
Yeah, reaction that's needed. If you could keep it cold enough, like put it in a cold enough area, it would stop the chemical reaction, because it still is a fire. It still needs energy, so it would put it out incredibly fast, but it still burns. It's just like burning magnesium. You can't put magnesium out if when there's enough magnesium in some of the fighter jets that when a jet in the Navy catches on fire and the metal starts burning, the magnesium and the metal starts burning, they have to push it off the deck of the ship and just into the ocean, and it will burn all the way to the floor of the ocean, and it will continue to burn until the magnesium is depleted. That's why they push it off, because you can't put that fire out.
Jesus.
So yeah, you don't want this stuff falling on you, because it'll burn right through you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So it's yeah. It's as I said.
Nasty stuff.
Yeah. The Russian army has been genuinely medieval, and I studied Russian in high school. I, am aware that there are many faults in the culture, but they're a proud people, and there's a difference between the people and the government. And I've always had an affection or affinity for Russians in general. Having said that, and I'm aware that their people, even the soldiers, are, not, in most cases, not as interested in prosecuting this war as certainly their government is, but the atrocities that they've been committing, and we've put it on our Discord, and it's genuine acts of terror. Starsky had pointed out that they are Al-Qaeda level terrorist tactics. And the only reason that they haven't been dubbed a terrorist organization is because they have military ID cards. And I was like, that's actually true. And it's and that we've got loads of stuff on our Discord. Come join our Discord, and like I said, you have to actually opt into explicit channels like that. But and as Andrew had pointed out, we have channels for gaming. I'm a gamer, but philosophy, politics, health. We cover COVID a lot. We cover just about everything. We did climate change last night. All right, it looks like they are starting now. So this is Attorney General Letitia James, New York State Attorney General, with what she has described, or her office has described as, quote, a major announcement. The odds are probably slightly in favor of it's an indictment against Donald J. Trump, but yeah, the saying like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, and we were here before, and it was not Trump, and she knew everyone thought that, and she did it anyway. So, actually, I don't think it was her. It was prior her time. It was the office. So, we're just waiting on whatever this major announcement is. It might be NRA again. It might be an indictment, a grand jury indictment against a former president of the United States. So we will see. In the meantime, as I said before, so tomorrow night we're going to have on Commander Lance McMillan. He staged the Iraq War out of CENTCOM for the Fifth Fleet. He knows his shit, and we've been talking to him basically every single day as it is. He still has, he knows where to find military information, and he's been very helpful with us trying to figure out what's going on and how the U.S. military is responding to Russia and what to expect next. And he's been an immense resource for us, and we're going to be on with him tomorrow night. It's actually a downtime. Downtime is our show where usually we just talk and shoot the shit. That's it. So we'll take interesting people, but didn't Jerry Seinfeld have a show like that where he's interviewing people, but like he'll go out for coffee with Obama? That's it. We just sit and talk about whatever we talk about. We talked about training dogs. We talk about college. But recently we've been coming right back to a war in Ukraine, and coffees and cars. Yeah, so it's we've been coming back to the war in Ukraine. It's been hard to get off of that topic, and I think tomorrow we may preempt downtime and do an end time to really talk to him about this. I think. Obviously, it's that's it. Comedians in cars. Amy would know that. All right, thank you, Amy. It's Putin bringing up 300,000 reservists is concerning for obvious reasons, but even more concerning is his ability. What we think he's going to do is he's going to declare 4 regions in Russia. In Ukraine, 4 Ukrainian regions he's going to declare as part of Russia. Then he's going to take any standing army, I say standing army, it means something very specific. Any army that is currently in there, which will be the Ukrainian army, because it's actually Ukraine and they're defending themselves, and he's going to say, you see, they are now in Russia. They are a foreign army in Russia fighting Russians. We have now been invaded, and now he gets to declare war he can bypass the Duma, declare war, and he gets significant war powers, which nobody wants him to have. He wants, but he needs the Duma to declare war unless they're invaded. So that's what he's going to do. It's a desperate move, actually, at this point. He's out of anything but desperate moves, and I don't think he can mobilize even a tenth of that 300,000. But that's what he's going to do. Biden, just a few minutes ago, said that this is counter to the charter of the UN. We believe he's using that language to set up a move to see if Russia can be expelled from the UN. This is something that Putin cannot afford. But at this point, if he thinks that he's dead either way, he may go for the long shot, which is what you were talking about as Andrew. If Russia gets expelled from the UN, they lose their veto power, and all of a sudden the UN now has teeth in regards to dealing with Russia. It doesn't have teeth dealing with the US, doesn't have teeth dealing with any of the other permanent member countries, but all of a sudden it has teeth with Russia because Russia no longer has veto power. So The only reason that the UN has been so ineffective is because every major country that it could influence has veto power. So everyone just vetoes it, and there you go. All of a sudden, but that ineffectiveness is only because everybody sort of cancels each other out. All of a sudden, Russia would be the only major country that can't do that anymore. Putin does not want that. But I think there's been, I know there's been talk about seeing if they can get Russia expelled. I don't think there's been a tremendous amount of I don't think they've been for that, but there hasn't been a lot of resistance to the idea either, and Putin is on thin ice over there. I mean, they literally stood up and walked out when Russia's diplomats are talking. So we'll see. We'll see. I think that's going to be the next major move at the UN. I think is going to be talking about expelling them. I think they're waiting for Putin to just do one more cray-cray thing, and he's setting that up right now. So he's up to bat. So let's see. Amy Newman said, even with more troops, I don't think it will help Russia much. Ukraine now has experienced troops fighting their home versus newbies who don't want to be there. I agree. And I don't think he can bring any more than 10% of them to the front lines because they don't have the logistical structure. They could maybe bring them there, but they're basically then just using them as shields because, yeah, they probably have enough AK-47s. They don't have enough ammo, and they don't have enough fuel, and they probably don't have enough food. So what are you bringing them to the front lines for? Having said that, the concern is this. If Russia is invaded, that Putin has said he would recognize the right to use weapons of mass destruction if Russia were invaded, whether or not we'd agree that you could use WMD. Certainly being invaded changes the calculus, and even we say we'd use nuclear weapons to defend ourselves. So if Russia's invaded, that changes ostensibly what he can use in terms of military power. If he declares 4 regions of Russia that have declared themselves independent, actually 2 have declared themselves independent, but it's convoluted. If those 2 that have declared themselves independent, he say now are part of Russia. If he takes the entire eastern third of Ukraine and says, this is now Russia, then any troops that are in there that are fighting Russians are by definition an invading force. He then says they're invading, I can use chemical weapons, WMDs, nuclear weapons against them. And he suggested that he would use nuclear weapons. Would he actually do it? Well, up until now, he hasn't. I think there are a number of reasons for that, but I think he's getting very, very desperate. I think he's afraid he's going to be assassinated. I think he's got legit concerns there. We covered one assassination attempt already. And we think there's been more. That's the only one that we found out about. What would he do to stay in power and to stay alive? I don't think nuclear weapons or deploying those are going to help him. On the flip side, I don't know what. All right, we've got sound. Is Andrew, can you hear that?
Please be seated.
No, I don't hear it.
Good morning. Following a comprehensive 3-year investigation by my office, including witnesses, interviews with more than 65 witnesses, and review of millions of documents that were submitted by Mr. Trump and others, I am announcing that today we are filing a lawsuit against Donald Trump for violating the law as part of his efforts to generate profits for himself, his family, and his company. The complaint demonstrates that Donald Trump falsely inflated his net worth by billions of dollars to unjustly enrich himself and to cheat the system, thereby cheating all of us.
Anything, though.
Sorry,
he did this with the help of the other defendants, his children, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, and Eric Trump, and former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg and Trump Organization Controller Jeffrey McConney. Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization repeatedly and persistently manipulated the value of assets to induce banks to lend money to the Trump Organization on more favorable terms than would otherwise have been available to the company, to pay lower taxes, to satisfy continuing loan agreements, and to induce insurance companies to provide insurance coverage for higher limits and at lower premiums. This conduct was all in violation of Executive Law, Section 6312, which gives the Attorney General broad and special powers to go after persistent and repeated fraud and illegality. As part of demonstrating illegality under that section of Law 6312, we show that they violated several state criminal laws, including falsifying business records, issuing false financial statements, insurance fraud, and engaging in a conspiracy to commit each of these state law violations. We believe the conduct alleged in this action also violates federal criminal law, including issuing false statements to financial institutions and bank fraud. And we are referring those criminal violations that we've uncovered to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York and the Internal Revenue Service. As a result of these violations, we are asking the court to, among other things, permanently bar Mr. Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Ivanka Trump, Eric Trump, from serving as an officer or director in any corporation or similar entity registered and or licensed in New York.
Whoa.
To bar Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization from entering into any New York State commercial real estate acquisition or from applying for loans from any financial institution in New York for 5 years. To pay for the financial benefits obtained as a result of the persistent fraudulent practices at an estimated $250 million. And towards the end of my remarks, I will go into the other relief that we are seeking. At the center of the year-long financial scheme were the statements of financial condition that were prepared annually by and for Mr. Trump, specifically from 2011 to 2021. These statements were compiled by the Trump Organization executives and were issued as a compilation report by Mr. Trump's accounting firm. The statements are explicit that the preparation was the responsibility of Mr. Trump. Or starting in 2016, the trustees of his trust, Donald Trump Jr. and Alan Weisselberg, for the sole benefit of Mr. Donald Trump. Each statement was personally certified as accurate by Mr. Trump or by one of his trustees as part of the loan process, with the intent that the information in the statement would be relied upon by banks and insurers. Mr. Trump and Mr. Weisselberg would meet to review and approve the final statement every year. Mr. Trump made known through Alan Weisselberg that he wanted his net worth reflected on the statements to increase, a desire Mr. Weisselberg and others carried out year after year in their fraudulent preparation of the statements. And when asked about these meetings under oath as part of our deposition, both men, Mr. Trump and Mr. Weisselberg, invoked their Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, and they refused to answer. When asked under oath if he, Mr. Trump, continued to review and approve the statements after becoming President of the United States in 2017, Mr. Trump, again, invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege and refused to answer. Over the course of our investigation, we found that Mr. Trump, his children, the Trump Organization, created and used more than 200 false and misleading asset valuations on his statement of financial condition over that 10-year period. They issued statements that were in clear violation of general accepted principles in the general accounting principles in the United States, despite representing that these statements were prepared in accordance with these principles. Some of the common tactics they used include representing that Mr. Trump had cash on hand that he did not have, ignoring critical restrictions that would significantly impact property values when setting valuations, changing the methodology used to value properties from year to year without reason or notice, and using vastly different methods to value different properties even in the same year, and including tangible items such as brand premiums, the Trump premium, when calculating an asset's value, despite the fact that they ignored the advice of outside professionals. They also ignored the advice and appraisals of outside professionals, despite claiming those individuals provided certain figures. For example, they received a series of bank-ordered appraisals for the commercial property at 40 Wall Street in New York City that calculated the value of the property at $200 million as of August 2010 and $220 million as of November 2012. Yet, in his 2011 statement, Mr. Trump listed 40 Wall Street with a value of $524 million, which increased to $530 million over the next 2 years, more than twice the value calculated by the professionals. Even more egregious, the $500 million plus valuation was attributed to information from the appraiser who valued the building at just over $200 million. Another deceptive strategy they employed was to use objectively false numbers to calculate property values. Take Mr. Trump's triplex. You know, the triplex apartment in Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue? Mr. Trump represented that his apartment spanned more than 30,000 square feet, which was the basis for valuing the apartment. In reality, the apartment had an area of less than 11,000 square feet, something that Mr. Trump was well aware of. And based on that inflated square footage, the value of the apartment in 2015 and 2016 was $327 million. To this date, no apartment in New York City has ever sold for close to that amount. Tripling the size of the apartment for purposes of the valuation was intentional and deliberate fraud, not an honest mistake. Mr. Trump was intimately familiar with the layout of both the building and the apartment, having personally overseen the construction of both. Despite his sworn testimony before invoking his Fifth Amendment privilege, Mr. Weisselberg conceded that using the false square footage improperly inflated the value of the apartment almost threefold. Mr. Weisselberg admitted that this amounted to an overstatement of, give or take, $200 million. Misrepresenting the size of the apartment was only one of the many ways that Mr. Trump intentionally misvalued his asset for the purposes of increasing his net worth and inducing banks to offer more favorable terms. Mr. Trump also routinely ignored legal restrictions on development rights and marketability on properties that would significantly decrease property values. For example, let's take Trump Park Avenue in New York. This building contains both commercial and residential space. The unsold residential condo units owned by Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization represented the lion's share of the reported value for this property. Mr. Trump and his children intentionally ignored legal restrictions on some of the units that would have drastically changed the valuation. Specifically, the 12 of those units were actually rent-stabilized apartments. A professional appraiser valued those 12 units at around $750,000, noting that the rent-stabilized units cannot be marketed as individual units for sale because the current tenants cannot be forced to leave. Despite this professional valuation, and Mr. Trump knowing full well the legal restrictions the 12 rent-stabilized units were valued, he valued them collectively on his statements at $49 million. That is about 65 times the appraised valuation. Mr. Trump also blatantly ignored legal restrictions at Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago was valued on the false premise that it sat on unrestricted property and could be developed for residential use. However, Mr. Trump knew that Mar-a-Lago was subject to a host of onerous restrictions and limitations. Mr. Trump himself signed deeds sharply restricting changes to the property and donating his residential development rights in an effort to get a tax deduction and later to lower his property taxes on the property. The deeds also require Mr. Trump to donate over 23% of Mar-a-Lago's value to the Historic Trust for Historic Preservation if he ever sold it. Despite these significant restrictions, Mr. Trump valued the property based on the false premise that it was an unrestricted residential 18-acre plot of land that could be sold and used as a private home. In fact, the valuations represent that these restrictions don't even exist. The club generated annual revenues of less than $25 million and should have been valued at about $75 million. However, Mar-a-Lago was valued as high as $739 million. Mr. Trump used inappropriate schemes to inflate the value of his other golf clubs. He valued the clubs based on their fixed assets. In other words, the money spent to acquire and to maintain them, despite being informed by valuation professionals that this practice was inappropriate for a club operating as an ongoing business. He again added a brand premium when determining the value of the club, but claimed in his statements that he did not. And he inflated the value of unsold memberships, often by hundreds of thousands of dollars per membership, even in situations where the memberships were given away for free at Mr. Trump's direction. Inflating his reported net worth was just the first part of the scheme. He then used these false statements of financial condition for his own personal gain. Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization have obtained hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate loans and insurance coverage using these statements. Mr. Trump was able to secure much more favorable loan terms by personally guaranteeing the loans based on his reported net worth, as reflected on his statements of financial condition. These statements were integral to Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization's ability to secure loans for a number of properties, including the old post office in Washington, D.C. Mr. Trump's statements were first submitted to the federal government to demonstrate his financial status, his net worth. He then engaged with Deutsche Bank to obtain a loan to redevelop the property. Mr. Trump was able to obtain much more favorable loan terms by personally guaranteeing the loans.
Starting in on Deutsche Bank.
So in 2014, he secured a loan from Deutsche Bank for $170 million. And as you know, in May of 22, Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization, they sold the post office, the old post office property, for $375 million, resulting in a $100 million net profit, which was the result of a loan he was able to obtain through the use of false and misleading statements of financial condition.
Okay, we're going to unpack all this.
Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization saved an estimated $150 million by receiving favorable interest rates that were only provided based on the false and misleading statements of financial condition. We also believe that he illegally saved millions of dollars in federal tax benefits, conservation easement donations related to Seven Springs in Westchester and the Trump National Golf Club in Los Angeles. And this conduct is not the subject of this action, but we are referring it to the IRS and to the Southern District of New York. The examples I laid out just barely scratch the surface of the misconduct that we have uncovered. The complaint, which all of you should have a copy, is more than 280 pages long.
Jesus.
It includes examples from 23 assets that were grossly and fraudulently inflated, and those inflated values were used on Mr. Trump's statements almost every year. All told, we uncovered more than 200 examples of false and misleading asset valuations that were used on his statements. The pattern of fraud and deception that was used by Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization for their own financial benefit is astounding. Inflating the values of assets by whatever means necessary to increase Mr. Trump's purported net worth. And then that net worth was used to further enhance his financial standing, intentionally misrepresenting his financials to obtain incredible economic benefit. It was a scheme that, by its very nature, became more profitable over time. And it is all in stark violation of the law. As I mentioned earlier, the relief that we are seeking specifically, we are asking the court, again, to permanently bar Mr. Trump, Donald Trump, Eric Trump, Ivanka Trump from serving as an officer or director in any corporation or similar business entity registered or licensed in New York State. We are barring Mr. Trump and his organization from entering into any New York State commercial real estate acquisition for 5 years. We are barring Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization from applying for any loans from any financial institution registered with the New York Department of Financial Services for 5 years. We are requiring Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization to disgorge the financial benefits obtained through the persistent fraudulent practices, an estimated, a baseline, at the minimum of $250 million, and to appoint an independent monitor at the Trump Organization to oversee compliance, financial reporting, valuations, and disclosures to lenders, insurers, and tax authorities for no less than 5 years. We are requiring the Trump Organization to prepare on an annual basis for the next 5 years a GAAP, a generally accepted accounting practices compliant audited statement of financial condition showing Mr. Trump's net worth to be distributed to all the recipients of his prior statements of financial condition. To replace the current trustees of the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust with new independent trustees, or require similar independent governance if a new trust is created, and to permanently bar Alan Weisselberg and Jeffrey McConney from serving in the financial control of any New York corporation. And lastly, to cancel any certificate filed under and by virtue of the provisions of Section 130 of the General Business Law for the corporate entities named as defendants and any other entity controlled by or beneficially owned by Donald Trump, which participated in or benefited from the ongoing financial scheme.
Oh my.
In other words, permanently prohibit any of these companies from doing business in the state of New York. I want to be clear.
God.
White-collar financial crime is not a victimless crime. When the well-connected break the law to take in more money that they are entitled to, it reduces resources to working people, to regular people, to small businesses, and to all taxpayers. Everyday people cannot lie to a bank about how much money they have in order to get a favorable loan to buy a home or to send their kid to college. And if they did, the government would throw the book at them. Why should this be any different? It is a tale of two justice systems, one for everyday working people and one for the elite, the rich and the powerful. Mr. Trump and his allies may say that these penalties are too harsh or that this is part of a witch hunt. I will remind everyone that this investigation only started after Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, testified before Congress and shed light on this misconduct. And the remedies are consistent with what we have sought for other businesses that committed the same misconduct. This investigation revealed that Donald Trump engaged in years of illegal conduct to inflate his net worth, to deceive banks and the people of the great state of New York. Claiming you have money that you do not have does not amount to the art of the deal. It's the art of the steal. And there cannot be different rules for different people in this country or in this state. And former presidents are no different. And so today we are making good on that promise, on our commitment, because no one is above the law. And I would like for them to stand. This investigation was led by Senior Enforcement Counsel Kevin Wallace, Senior Counsel Andrew Amer, Assistant Attorney General Colleen Faherty, Assistant Attorney General Alex Finkelstein, Assistant Attorney General Will Handley, Assistant Attorney General Stephanie Torre, Assistant Attorney General Austin Thompson, Special Counsel to the Solicitor General Eric Herron, Enforcement Section Chief Louis Solomon, Legal Support Analyst Samantha Stern. Additional support was provided by a data analyst, Anusha Chowdhury, Senior Data Analyst, Akram Hashanoff, Data Scientist, Chun-Soo Song, Deputy Director of Research and Analytics, Megan Thorsfeld, Director of Research and Analytics, Jonathan Werberg.
All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute it while she's going through all of this. So Isandering has been patiently waiting because, unfortunately, we lost the internal sound, so he was not able to hear this. So he's sitting there going like, he's listening to me go, oh my God, oh dear Lord. He's like, what's going on? I'm going to... So she's going over so there is a tremendous amount to unpack in all that. I want to make two things crystal clear before we start, and I am watching the subtitles so that I can see what she's saying. You can still see the subtitles here. Actually, it looks like she's done with since she's done with that, I'm gonna bring it back real quick.
To turn it over to Delaney, who's going to...
Okay, so what you need to know is that...
Thank you.
This is not a criminal indictment. He's not facing jail time. This is a civil suit, so he has not been indicted criminally. However, this is an attempt at wiping out the entire Donald Trump empire for him and his children. This is an incredible move.
Manhattan DA as well. You've been part of that investigation, and should we expect...
Also, and they're being asked now the key question: how much of this has been referred to a DA? And she suggested earlier all of it.
Attorney of Manhattan, and we are cooperating with the Manhattan District Attorney, and any information that he is requesting, we will submit it to his office. We cooperate with any law enforcement agency, including but not limited to the Manhattan DA. Thank you.
So they've given it to the IRS. They've given it to the
You
Southern
said that
District.
his career and his empire was basically a sham and smoke and mirrors. Can you just describe, are you trying to shut him down, and where do we go from here?
So, again, this investigation has to do with his statements of financial condition over a period of 2011 to 2021. And this is an attempt to seek redress for the taxpayers of the great state of New York, for individuals in the great state of New York. And he could reconstruct, reorganize a number of these corporations. But the relief that we are seeking from this judge is, again, for him to reform his practices in the state of New York and to prohibit him from engaging in any real estate commercial transactions in the state of New York going forward.
Ms. James, as you note these, I apologize. Henry Rossoff with Pix 11. As you note, these allegations are at least 3 years old. That's the origin of your investigation. The DOJ and IRS have had access to the same starting points that you did. With these referrals, do you hope to force their hand into action?
It's not a question of forcing their hands. It's a question of presenting to them evidence, which we believe suggests illegality and suggests that he was engaging in a number of schemes to benefit himself, his corporation, and his family. And so we will present this information to the District Attorney of New York, if he requested, as well as the Southern District of New York and the IRS, based on the allegations that we uncovered.
All right, yeah, sorry, and I'm also in part trying to speak to his Andrew because he doesn't hear anything. So to reiterate what we have so far, and then we'll continue this, they're asking the questions now. What we have is a single lawsuit. The Associated Press has already released a number of details of it. They actually released it a moment before she spoke. So what we have is the New York Attorney General is filing suit against Trump, against his children, and against essentially the Trump organization, saying that for the last 10 years they have received huge economic benefits by lying on business documents. The largest of these lies was to overvaluate the value of their properties, in some cases 60-fold. And that by doing this, they got more favorable rates on loans. They were able to get higher rebates, and were able to. They also lied, ostensibly, if I understood this correctly, in evaluations for deductions. So the cost of services, any number of other things. They are essentially being hit with fraud. And a number of other complaints, some of these stemming through Deutsche Bank. If they open up Deutsche Bank, he's in real trouble because that's all money laundering. But that's another thing. We've talked about that before. I'm sure we will again. This is more than just accusations, because we know for a fact some of these must necessarily be true, because he submitted statements, for example, talking about the square footage of certain residents that was in some cases 2 times or even more in the evaluation than the actual square footage. He signed off on this. He was there. He received the appropriate square footage measurements from evaluators, and then he told the people running the business, and we already have that from his accounting firm has turned all that over. The accounting firm has said that you can no longer rely on any of the evaluations that they've done over the last 10 years. That's a fact. They've said that publicly. They've told any public official not to use their accounting data because they were lied to by Trump. They've flipped I think it was the CFO has flipped. And we know for a fact that statements that he has submitted are, in fact, false. And a lot of them, especially, again, the square footage and the evaluation, because we've seen the actual evaluations, we've seen the actual square footage, and we've seen what was submitted. And we've had people say that he told them to lie about it. So they will win this. How much they win is arguable, but some of this we know for a fact is true. It's not opinion. We have the documents. So the question is, how much? They are going after him for Mar-a-Lago, for over-evaluating that presumably because that pertains to his income, how much he was making, and also was used as an asset when he was getting money. He said that he owned Mar-a-Lago free and clear, when in fact previously he had taken a huge tax write-off on Mar-a-Lago by declaring it, at least in part, commercial space not usable for residential. He also has a huge liability on it. 23% of it has to be donated. That's in accordance with a deal that he made that made much of Mar-a-Lago tax exempt, but also means that he can't use Mar-a-Lago, the full value of Mar-a-Lago, as an asset, since he has to donate 23% of it upon sale. So she gave these as examples of ways in which he has misrepresented his financial situation. So apparently he got the tax write-offs for donating a percentage of Mar-a-Lago, but has continue to valuate Mar-a-Lago at the full value, even though he cannot, he can't sell it for the full value because I think she said 23 or 26% of it. He must donate as part of the deal. So she is seeking a court. Now, this is not criminal, so he cannot go to jail for this, but the court will necessarily find him guilty on at least some of this. I shouldn't say guilty, it's liable because it's civil court. The court can do anything. The court could say it's not that big a deal, maybe hit him with some fines. They're asking for a minimum of $250 million, but they're saying they can't actually evaluate it until they get a full evaluation of Trump's complete net worth and real evaluations of the taxes over the last 10 years. They want an officer assigned by the court to go over all of his financials and figure out exactly how much money he's taken, how much money he has gotten illegitimately by lying about the value of his businesses and other fraudulent business practices. She wants all of it returned. She wants the Trump organization to be unable to do business in the state of New York. I think for the business it was going forward, just the Trump business, the Trump organization cannot do business in New York because it violated so many business practices. She wants Trump's children to be unable to inherit anything from that business. They want them to be unable to access anything from that business. They want restitution, and they want all of them barred from doing any business in New York. I think it was limited to real estate, but it was real estate financial. They can't get loans in the state of New York for a minimum of 5 years. This would completely end the Trump empire. They would end up owing a great deal of money back. The current thinking is that they have much less net worth than they have stated. They may not be able to pay restitution, and they would certainly lose the entire business and its ability to operate in the state of New York. That's where we stand. So while we are not looking at jail time, we are looking at all of his entire financial organization is now in jeopardy, and it seems to me quite significant jeopardy, since we know some of this must necessarily be true. This was the easiest thing to prosecute. It wasn't the sexiest thing to prosecute, but we knew they had him once the real evaluations came out, because he signed documents that said that the properties were evaluated at X, Y, and Z, and the evaluator had all the documents from the original evaluations, and it was not. Anything you want to say, Xander? And then I'm going to quickly go, because she's still taking questions, but I wanted to pause and get you up to date and get everyone up to date, because she said a lot. Anything you wanted to mention before we go? Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like this is the opening salvo. If they can get this into court, they can get favorable judgments. I think that criminal indictments would go hog wild, and they'd be able to get those fairly easily.
I think you're right. I think criminal indictments are next. I think they're doing this. The bar is much lower. They don't have to get quite the same level of evidence to get criminal indictments, and I think. I think you're right. I think this is the opening salvo. So let's go back and listen. She's now taking questions. The first question was exactly what I'd ask first, which is, how much of this have you referred for criminal indictment? She said she didn't seem. She said that they will work with the Attorney General's office, as they always do. What that suggests to me is that she's aware that they've been hesitant to move forward on stuff that they have that should be strikes me as indictable. That's why two attorneys from the Southern District resigned, was because they're like, this is easily indictable, and they're not doing it. And so we'll see. This may light a fire under their ass. She seems to think that she's just going to go forward either way, but she didn't. She was tepid on that. She's also referred this to the IRS. The IRS is already looking into his taxes. It wouldn't be that hard to roll this in, so he's going to have more IRS problems. All of this is serious for the IRS. She also said that most of this, I think one reason they haven't gone criminal, I mean, there's going to be, the Attorney General may go criminal in, and that's what would be looking to see out of the Southern District. But a lot of this crosses state lines. His empire is also very much in Florida, some in Chicago. She talked about those properties. She talked about them because they pertain to the financial empire and to what he was doing in New York when he was trying to get funding out of Deutsche Bank. So he used all those properties, and she explained why some of those properties cannot be valued even close to what the valuation was that he was using. That would also probably be crimes in each of those states, and is probably a federal crime, and most states would rather the feds prosecute it than the state, because then you're using federal taxpayer money instead of state taxpayer money, and it's much easier to get the feds to do it. So my suspicion is she's hoping that the federal government is going to go in on some of these big ones, and it's going to save the state having to do it. Some of it, I have no doubt the state is going to do. This is what looks like on the surface a body blow to the entire Trump organization. We don't know how he's going to respond yet. We know for a fact some of this has to be true. They've got it. We've known this for some time. This was always the slam dunk one. The other cases are harder to make. This was easy because we have all the documents. The documents are out there. We know he did this. So whether or not a judge is going to give her everything she's asking for, we don't know. But she said what she's asking for is reasonable. It strikes me as reasonable considering the circumstances. And if he's as guilty as it looks and as she claims, then I think it's reasonable. So this is potentially actually a death blow to the entire Trump organization. It would be his kids. It would be him. They cannot do business in the state of New York, and the entire Trump organization is effectively dissolved. It's not actually dissolved, but it can't do business anymore. They can't do anything. So this would wipe out the whole Trump organization.
Based on the evidence that we uncovered.
Escalation with CNN.
Hi.
Are you willing to settle with the Trump organization? And if so, what terms would be appropriate and favorable for you that you would agree to settle?
I will not negotiate in public. And as you know, has been publicly reported, we rejected settlement offers that they submitted, and our doors are always open.
All right. She was just asked about settlement, and she's like, she won't settle. She won't do settlement negotiations in public, but the Trump organization did try to settle. But yeah, Weisselberg has flipped, and that's another thing. So they've got all the receipts on this. They've got his accountant. They've got the CFO. I think it's the CFO of the Trump organization. They've got what they need. This is, of all the things that he's done, again, it's not the sexiest. It's a bit like indicting Capone for tax fraud, but it's the one they know they can get him on. They can get him on this, and this strikes me as potentially this easily has the ability to wipe out the entire Trump organization, all of it. So let's continue with the questioning.
Dana, Washington Post. It's been suggested by Mr. Trump and his advocates that they were engaging in standard practices. This is standard in a real estate business. How is what they were doing different from standard practice here? And can you comment on that defense?
So this conduct cannot be brushed aside and dismissed as some sort of good faith mistake. The statements of financial condition were greatly exaggerated, grossly inflated, objectively false, and therefore fraudulent and illegal. And as a result of that, we are seeking relief, and Mr. Trump, the Trump organization, his family, they should all be held accountable. And that is the purpose of this litigation that we are filing today, in addition to referring the criminal conduct to the Southern District of New York, as well as the IRS. No one, my friend, is above the law.
This is going to put huge pressure on the Southern District, and they had asked that too about pressure on the Southern District. Does she mean to do that? She goes, no, we're just giving them the evidence, but this will put huge pressure on them.
Marcia Kramer from CBS. Madam Attorney General, I have a two-part question. Number one, is there anything to prevent Mr. Trump from establishing his corporations, even for the properties in New York, in another state, since he is now become a legal resident of Florida? And secondly, you called it, Donald Trump Jr. has already started tweeting that this, quote, the Democratic witch hunt has begun, if you'd like to respond to that as well.
So with regards to the name calling, as you know, they've basically have attempted to delay this investigation, and two judges have dismissed those claims that this was a political witch hunt. So I give no credence to those to the names that he has referred to me. And two, Mr. Trump, the Trump Organization, as well as his family, will still have to deal with this complaint. They will still have to respond. They will still have to respond to the allegations therein. And so if, in fact, he decided to move to Florida, the reality is he still has to deal with the great state of New York and respond to the complaint.
But he can't, he cannot, establish another corporation, put these properties in a corporation that he incorporates in another state.
No, he
Could be
cannot.
any state other than.
Correct. These corporations are currently incorporated in the state of New York. Some are incorporated in Delaware, but they do business in the state of New York. And he cannot just pick up and those same corporations can be moved to Florida. No. And again, Marcia, just to put a finer point on that, we are attempting, as part of our relief, to dissolve these corporations. Yeah.
Laura Italiano.
Okay, yeah. So she just said it. They're trying to dissolve all of the Trump organizations. They're going to wipe them out.
From Insider. In practical terms, much of former President Trump's biggest money-generating properties are in Manhattan, in New York State. Would he, if this relief is granted by the judge down the road, would he be able to collect rents, to obtain loans on the properties? What precise, what practical implications to sell the properties should he want to? Is the corporation that's filed in New York necessary for him to do those things?
So again, most of the corporations have been incorporated in the state of New York. There are some that have been incorporated in Delaware, but they continue to do business in the state of New York. We are permanently barring Mr. Trump and his family members from serving as an officer or director in any entity in the state of New York. We are barring him from entering into any commercial real estate transactions for 5 years. We are barring Mr. Trump and the organization from applying for any loans for 5 years, just for 5 years, requiring him to repay the financial benefits of $250 million, placing a monitor over these corporations, requiring him to file a GAAP-compliant statement of financial condition, replacing the trustees, if in fact he creates a new trustee, and permanently barring Alan Weisselberg and Jeffrey McConney, and canceling his certificate of incorporations for those corporations that we discussed. Yes.
Canceling
Are
the
these
incorporation for them.
relief that a judge would have to approve?
Yes.
So these things aren't happening at the moment?
Correct.
But this is what will be litigated now down the line?
Correct. And it's important also to understand that Mr. Trump will continue to have a financial interest in a lot of these corporations. And so if he decides to, at some point in time, sell them, or if he decides to restructure them, again, this is all part of the relief that we are seeking. I said to Marcia that we're seeking to dissolve them. That was incorrect. We're not seeking to dissolve them. He still has a financial interest in these businesses and corporation.
Meaning he still owns them?
Correct.
However, to collect rent, to obtain a loan based on them as collateral, to sell the property, maybe I'm missing some other practical things. If approved by a judge down the road, these are things he would not be able to do with those properties.
Correct. For the next 5 years.
Okay. We're going to take 2 more questions.
Hi, Josh Gerstein with Politico.
Yeah.
Madam
Yeah, that's a death blow. So she's saying that she doesn't want to dissolve these institutions, but she did say they're going to pull the incorporation. I don't know if she misspoke. She kind of suggested she misspoke there. If they can't do business in New York for 5 years, if they can't take out loans, if they can't collect rent, if they can't do anything for 5 years, the company is gone. It's dead. You don't just sit in New York taking up real estate for 5 years and not do anything. This is a death blow. She's trying to end the entire Trump empire.
Attorney General, can you explain something about how the former president, you allege he did this for at least a decade or more than a decade, how did he get away with what you're saying he got away with for such a long period of time? A lot of these transactions are with some of the largest financial institutions and insurance companies in the state of New York. Do they just not check anything that people tell them, or they presumed it was true, or did they have hints that these things were not true that they were being told? And what does it tell you about those institutions that they would take his word for it?
So let me just say, with respect to Mazars indicated on the statement of financial condition that they did not certify and they did not audit these statements. That does not absolve Mr. Trump of submitting accurate information. Two, with respect to Cushman Wakefield, there is an ongoing investigation into Cushman Wakefield. And then lastly, with respect to Deutsche Bank, we're in conversations with Deutsche Bank. They have been cooperating with our office.
Last question.
Didn't answer the question.
Do you feel like this lawsuit is going to be resolved quickly, or do you feel like this is going to be a drawn-out process?
So that's entirely up to the judge. That's good? Okay. I thank you all for coming, and if there's any specific questions, I believe my members of the team will answer your questions. Thank you.
All right, so I think that's it. She's done. Jason Torn said, "quote: This is worse than a criminal indictment." Actually, I think in most respects it is, because a criminal indictment, had still, afterwards, it'd still have the empire, it'd still have money, it'd still have. This is going for the entire financial, all of it. It's the entire Trump organization. If this is successful, it will end the Trump organization. It will end all his businesses. It will end everything if it is successful. In part because his business will no longer be able to. Hold on one sec. In part because his business will not be able to generate revenue for him. It's he won't be able to do business in New York, and that's where most of this is out of. But the other reason is because he'll have to pay restitution, and it looks like he's not got really the ability to pay any significant restitution. And certainly, aside from, I forget how much he just put down. I want to say like it was $1 million to a law firm for. I mean, he's paying law firms. He's this looks to me like it very much has the potential to end him. So, in any meaningful sense, yeah, it's a good question, Biddy, as to how long it's going to be drawn out. I would imagine a judge would want to go reasonably quickly, but they don't want to make any mistakes either. So it's before a judge now. It'll be months at least. That's true. So, all right, Xandering, having not heard any of it and only hearing what my commentary on it. Again, apologies that you did not have the sound internally. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that it does, from what you said, seems like, that they probably are trying to just end the capability of the Trump organization to really do much of anything. Politically, this is what I see happening. The Trump support wing is going to come out and say that they don't have the ability to prove any criminal wrongdoing, or they would have done that instead. So that this is purely an ideological attack at whatever they can possibly gin up against him, that they probably don't have nearly the evidence they claim they do of financial malfeasance, but yet they can tie him up in court, costing him millions and millions of dollars in legal defenses, and that this is all just a witch hunt to try and take the greatest president in the history of the United States down. So that's what I see politically going on. So on that front, I think that's kind of a loss, but we'll see where it goes. I think from maybe a strategy of trying to hold a Trump account for the shenanigans that he's pulled, it might be the wisest course of action to get ultimate results. But I don't think this is going to play. This certainly isn't going to, I don't think, convince any of the Trump supporters that he's done anything wrong. If anything, I think it's going to galvanize them even more that this is a witch hunt by far lefty radicals that are trying to take Trump down by any nefarious means possible.
Unfortunately, I think you're probably right. I think that's a good observation. Yeah. So Jason asked, what if he declares bankruptcy? That's a distinct possibility. I would assume bankruptcy would wipe out some of these issues, but probably not all of them. What percentage, I don't know, but the different remedies would come through different elements, and nonetheless, even if he does, his businesses would still be in just as much jeopardy. So what was interesting and probably appropriate, but I was not expecting, was to hear Ivanka, Eric, and Donald all listed as co-conspirators and members of the members of the what's the term I'm looking for? Well, I want to say conspiracy, but that's a criminal term. But the part of the fraud themselves, they all enriched themselves. They all engaged in this practice. So it's going after absolutely everybody. It's
I guess they're going to get their collusion charge after all.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. We'll see. This is going to put pressure on the Southern District, and at least it. We've talked about this before, which is, the first one to indict Trump is going to have the hardest issue. But once it's done, now this is not an indictment because it isn't criminal, but I think it may be close enough. I think it's big, and I think Jason's got a good point. He might have preferred a criminal, and we've talked about this before. He's never going to spend a day in jail if he gets indicted. And gets found guilty of the worst criminal offenses. They can't really put him in jail for all sorts of reasons, Secret Service, yada, yada, yada. He's going to get Secret Service protection for the rest of his life. They can't protect him in jail. So he's going to get house arrest. He's going to get something like that. Whatever he gets, if he's still rich, if he still has his business, if he still has his empire, yada, 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 even if it's in trust or if it gets dissolved, but he gets to keep the income, whatever happens, at least it's very different that and losing absolutely everything. So this is an extraordinary blow. I'm looking forward to hearing. I'm not looking forward to hearing what Trump has to say because it's going to be bloviating. It's going to be nonsense, and I already know what he's going to say. I could write it for him. It's going to be an attack on all these. It's just going to be personal attacks and this and that. And we already know half of this has to be true because we've seen the documents. I mean, it's we've heard what the accountants have said. So he's going to deny all that.
Well, a case like this also. A case like this also potentially sets up essentially the discovery portion of a criminal trial as well, because these things are all going to become public and they can be used against him in a criminal trial as well. So, it's, like I said, I think that it might be a wise choice just as far as a strategy for trying to make as many things, convict them as many things as possible. It might be wise to start where they've got, the lowest hanging fruit, but I think, this isn't going to help politically.
No, I think that's true. I think that's true. I do think it's an interesting piece of timing because I also think that, as we've mentioned before, and we're going to be talking about tomorrow and the next day, it looks like things are about to start to pop off in Russia. We believe at this point Putin is going to declare at least 4 regions in Ukraine. He's going to, just by fiat, say that they're Russian. He's already recognized the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk. So he's going to say, okay, well, they're no longer independent. They want to be Russian. They are now Russian. And then because the Ukrainian army will actually be there, because Ukraine is fighting to kick the Russians out of Ukraine, what he's going to do is he's going to declare the Russians a invading force. He's going to say that they
Ukrainians an invading force.
Thank you for the correction. He's going to declare the Ukrainians an invading force. He's going to say the Ukrainians are in Russia because he's just declared those territories Russian, and they're fighting Russians, so they are invaders. That will allow him to declare war without the pesky Dumas, getting a say in it, and then he can enact martial law. He can conscript as many people as he wants to in the defense of Russia, and he has said he will use nuclear weapons in that defense. We'll talk about that. That's and I mean he said that many times before, but he said that today. So he wants people to be sure. We've seen some evidence of NATO redeployments even in advance of this. So we're going to discuss all that tomorrow and the next day, assuming that things don't get crazier. So, and join us on the Discord, and you can keep up with what we're keeping up with. But we'll if anything big happens, we'll definitely go live. But right now, we are looking at tomorrow downtime with Commander Lance McMillan, and then Friday, Operator Starsky, who is in the Ukrainian National Guard, fighting in Ukraine, and we're going to talk with him. Like, subscribe. It's a great way to help. If you appreciate getting this news and the commentary, do that. You can also become a patron. There are many ways in which you can support this channel, but like and subscribe is a easy, cheap way. Do it for free, and it does actually help us out with the algorithm.
Also, share the shows.
Oh, and share the shows, absolutely. And if there's, we had a great show last night, and as Andrew was pointing out, that was a good one. Share this show if you like the commentary on it. If you like what we had to say, we appreciate it. Let your friends know. That's another great way to help. Any final comments, as Andrew, before we go?
May you live in interesting times.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was going to be. All right. Thank you, Xandering. Thank you all. We will see you, barring anything really cray-cray happening, which is a distinct possibility. We will see you tomorrow for Downtime with Commander McMillan. Good night, all.